Chapter 318, Abram 5. It was a scene that compelled absolute astonishment. Upon seeing Sienna's face, the 31st king of Arath, Daendolf Abram, had fallen to his knees and pressed his forehead to the ground. He had been waiting for her while pacing around the room. Honian, the crown prince, was horrified to see his father in such a state. He knew well how his father upheld his dignity and authority. Years ago, when the issue of Eugene Lionheart's entry to Akron was being debated, Daendolf had sent his son, Prince Honian, instead of participating in person. The reason was simple. Kiel's Lionhearts were descendants of the Great Vermouth, and they were so prestigious that not even the Emperor of the Kiel Empire could easily deal with them. Daendolf had been hesitant to confront these heirs of Vermouth. In particular, despite being born from a collateral line, Eugene Lionheart was the only child to have become adopted into the main family in the history of Lionhearts. He had found it difficult to maintain the authority and dignity of a king towards a 17-year-old boy with such a background. Even during the hearings related to Akasha that followed, Daendolf did not attend in person. Despite it being a matter far more significant than the entry to Akron, he had sent his son as his proxy. He had wanted to avoid any dealings with Eugene Lionheart. He had not wanted to take any responsibility as a king while maintaining friendly relations with the archwizards opposing Eugene. Arath was a constitutional monarchy. The royal family had been in power for a long time, but they did not hold a stronger influence than Arath's council. That was why King Daendolf had been highly conscious of his external image and authority, and why Honian, as the crown prince, had been sent as a stand-in since childhood. "Your Majesty." The royal guards, ministers and servants had been previously dismissed. The only ones in the room were the Lionheart child Daendolf had long feared, Prince Honian and Tremple, the head of the court wizards. Yet even in their presence, the king, who had been forever obsessed with image and authority, was on his knees, his forehead pressed against the cold stone floor. Honian was deeply shocked. Even so, he quickly dismissed the shocking sight from his mind, then joined his father by kneeling beside him. With both the king and the crown prince kneeling, Tremple had no choice but to do the same. Once Tremple also kneeled, a heavy silence fell across the throne room. Eugene felt awkward just standing there. It reminded him of his infiltration of the Urus papacy about a year ago. The atmosphere then and now was different, naturally. Had a niece descended in person, the Pope and cardinals would have also knelt. "Why are you kneeling without being asked?" Sienna asked, seemingly unfazed by the scene. To her, this situation was utterly natural. Even hundreds of years ago, when Sienna lived in Arath, the royal family revered her greatly. They had no choice but to do so. Arath was renowned as the Magic Kingdom largely because of Sienna's influence and achievements. In fact, the yearly influx of tourists and aspiring wizards to the capital city was a testament to Sienna's renown and accomplishments. "How could I dare to look down upon Lady Sienna?" King Daendolf exclaimed in a gruff voice. After the hearings related to Akasha, he had prepared himself for a day like this. Yet, how he had wished for it to be after the royal succession. "Why not? Surely you can look down upon me," retorted Sienna. "Please do not test me. Rather, reprimand me severely for my transgressions," confessed the king. "Do you even know what you have done wrong?" Sienna inquired, narrowing her eyes. "There are too many to list, but if you permit, Lady Sienna, I will dare to express them," responded Daendolf. "Proceed," answered Sienna. "The greatest failure, I believe, is not treating you, who could be considered Arath's great matron, with proper respect," confessed Daendolf. "The mansion I left behind seems to have changed significantly," said Sienna. "I, too, lamented the destructive effects of our ancestors' greedy tourism policies," answered Daendolf. "And yet, why did you let it be?" inquired Sienna. "Even if we were to restore the mansion site immediately, I believe that the numerous tourists and aspiring wizards who visit Lady Sienna's mansion would have been greatly disappointed. Although I understand that this sounds like an excuse, please, I beg for your forgiveness," answered Daendolf. "Any other wrongs?" asked Sienna. "Not taking proper care of the familiar you cherished is also a grave sin." Thump. Daendolf bashed his head on the ground with force, and droplets of blood sprinkled within the rippling impact. "I think there is no room for excuses regarding this. The dissection of the familiar was a betrayal to you, Lady Sienna. But there is no doubt that our greatest sin took place just a few years ago when we had doubts about your successor and held hearings and trials. Thump thump. Daendolf continued to bash his head. I was blind, not believing in your resurrection, Lady Sienna. Please, vent all your wrath upon this old man. Spare the royal family of Aroth, I beg you. His plea was desperate. Honian, who was also bashing his head against the ground, wept at the sight of the painful struggle of the king, the thumping sounds and the small pool of blood forming on the floor. The king had always worked hard to maintain his authority and dignity. He had never openly expressed any desire for power or directly opposed the council. How many years had Honian resented the king for his fa? Ade. Now Honian felt heartbroken when he saw the king forsaking his honor to plead for the survival of the royal family. Sienna crossed her arms while squinting her eyes. It would take no effort for her to bury Abram at the bottom of the lake. It wouldn't be difficult for her to kill the elderly court wizard, the young crown prince and the current king right now. Even Eugene was nearby. Even if they thought about resisting now, the right to life and death in this space already rested in Sienna's hands. But the problem was what came after the killing. Even though the king was willingly offering his head, Aroth was an influential, powerful nation. Assassinating its king would surely bring about dangerous consequences. The council and the royal family were keeping each other in check, but they were not enemies. No matter how great Sienna's reputation was in Aroth, if she killed the king, Aroth would have no choice but to judge her by law for the sake of the kingdom. She didn't want such problems. Since 300 years ago, her enemies had always been the demon kings and the demon race. Her enemies were still living in this era and possessed power incomparable to the old times. Helmuth, the Devildom, was Sienna's enemy. She was lacking in power. Like 300 years ago, the entire continent had to unite to face the demon king. Sienna steeled her expression before speaking. The 31st king of Aroth, raise your head. Daendolf did not lift his head. Looking at the spreading pool of blood, Sienna spoke further. You as the king did not leverage your royal authority. You knelt down and begged for forgiveness. And you have received it. Daendolf slowly raised his head. Sienna continued, gazing at the blood-stained face of the aged king. Why did I go so far? You answered this question yourself as the crown prince. I was enraged at the numerous problems that occurred while I was gone. With today's events, Aroth and the world will surely realize that the wise Sienna is alive and well. I can thrust Abram to the bottom of the lake right this moment, take the life of the commander of the court wizards, the strongest wizard Aroth has to offer, and extinguish the seed of the royal family that has lasted for several generations. As she spoke, Sienna held up a cup. As you have said, I may be considered Aroth's great matron. The honor this country enjoys in this era could be said to be my work. I can shatter and steal that honor at any time. Rumble. The castle began to slowly rise again. Please do not forget this fact. If the royal family in this country love me, I will love this country too. But if you use my name for your gain, I will not love this country. Oh, yes, I will remember. One more thing. Sienna looked at Eugene and spoke. Eugene Lionheart is my successor. I've said it many times outside, but I would like the royal family to officially declare it too. We will certainly do that, answered the crown prince. And another thing, said Sienna once more. She had more to say? Everyone's gaze turned to Sienna. Sienna cleared her throat to those gazes and continued speaking. I have been living in seclusion for hundreds of years. I lived a simple life and left most of my property in Aroth. How should she say it to sound plausible and imposing? Even Sienna faltered in her words. Aroth has been filling the national treasury in the name of Sienna for hundreds of years, she said. Fortunately, Daendolf was not so foolish as to not understand what she was implying. If you give me a few days, I will prepare a solution for you, Lady Sienna, to use the assets of Aroth freely. And I will open the royal treasury to you immediately. She didn't need the money, but it was true that she didn't have any at the moment. The royal treasury, while it might not have anything spectacular, she was interested in the treasures and magic they would have accumulated over hundreds of years. Traditionally, products of Aroth's magical research were stored in the royal treasury. I will come to see the treasury tomorrow, said Sienna, putting down a kasha with a satisfied smile. She coveted a staff as well. The staff she was currently using was a temporary weapon made from the branches of the World Tree. It was an excellent item, but it was possible that a better staff waited for her in the treasury. Of course, she had Akasha, but ideally Sienna wanted Eugene to use it. There won't be any need for formal reception. It would be too burdensome, said Sienna. She had unleashed her fiery temper, taught a lesson to an arrogant archwizard of the current generation, and made the King of Aroth kneel with his forehead bleeding. A satisfied grin curled up her lips as she gave a friendly pat on Eugene's shoulder. Let's return my heir. Yes, Lady Sienna, replied Eugene. There was no question about it. Sienna relished calling Eugene her heir or successor. He couldn't comprehend what joy she found in it as they exited the grand hall together. Even after a while had passed since their departure, King Daendolf remained kneeling, his face streaked with blood. He made no attempt to clean the flow of blood from his ruptured forehead. Honian and Tremple remained kneeling beside him as they studied the Crown Prince's expression carefully. However, they could only find relief in Daendolf's face. Ha! After a good while, Daendolf rose from the ground while heaving a sigh of relief. His expression shifted slightly, yet there was no sign of humiliation in his eyes, despite having had to kneel and bleed from his forehead. He calmly returned to his throne and took a seat. Your Highness! Honian and Tremple called out while remaining on their knees. While wiping the blood from his forehead with his wet sleeve, Daendolf began to speak. Honian. Yes? Come closer. Honian approached the throne after jolting from his spot. With a calm and settled gaze, Daendolf studied the prince. Can a single archwizard annihilate a nation? He asked. Honian didn't know how to answer. Maybe not annihilate, but they can easily make a king kneel. An archwizard, particularly the wise Sienna, is such an existence. Yes. You already know this, but Aroth is a unique kingdom. Daendolf wiped off the blood and gave a bitter smile. For centuries it has been so. This kingdom of magic houses too many wizards. In particular, we have an abundance of exceptional talents. Most of the respected wizards in the continent reside in Aroth, along with young talents who could someday become archwizards. Honian wasn't sure where his father was going with this. In this kingdom, the royal family cannot possibly possess absolute power. It's designed this way. Even now, observe how a single archwizard with determination could threaten to submerge the royal palace, make the king kneel, and cut off the royal lineage. It was because of my incompetence. Tremple bashed his head against the ground while weeping. Daendolf shook his head and responded, Lord Tremple, it wasn't because of your incompetence. Every wizard of Aroth is equal in the presence of the wise Sienna. My point is that an absolute monarchy is impossible as long as such a wizard exists. Honian clutched his chest, stricken. His father, whom he had thought of as incapable and merely a figurehead, was now offering advice that made Honian revisit the dreams he had long cherished. The young prince had harbored a disillusionment towards the royalty that existed merely in name. He had often contemplated the purpose of a throne that was constantly wary of the council, the tower heads, and the guild of wizards. He thought the council, driven by various interests, should be dismantled and the royal family put in charge to lead the kingdom. He had yearned to change the symbolic nature of the royalty. He had yearned for a reformation of Aroth. If you desire to reshape this kingdom according to your vision, there is a straightforward way, Honian. You must become a wizard as formidable as the wise Sienna, advised Daendolf. Yes. I have always regarded your talent as exceptional, continued Daendolf. The royal blood of Aroth had produced remarkable wizards generation after generation. They could be described as lineages refined over centuries for the betterment of magic. Even the current king, Daendolf, was a wizard of the 7th circle. Honian had reached the 6th circle as a wizard at the young age of 25. It was indeed an incredible achievement for his age, yet, it left something to be desired. Despite reaching the 5th circle before adulthood, Honian still lingered in the 6th. Even the king had been stuck in the 7th for decades. I believed your talent to be worthy of pride, but no longer. You know the reason as well as I do. Honian immediately thought of Eugene. He had heard the rumors that the young man had created his own signature. Even though he had the aid of Akasha, Eugene Lionheart had ascended to the rank of an archwizard, at the mere age of 21. I am aware of your favorable relationship with the heir of wise Sienna. You have shown interest and kindness to Eugene Lionheart since he first arrived in Aroth. Yes. I also know you wish to retain him in Aroth. But the young man is extraordinarily talented. Can you keep a lion, a wild beast, within your walls? Can you leash it and tame it? I never thought to leash Sir Eugene. Oh, you merely wish to stand by its side and borrow its fangs and claws? When you can't handle a lion's fangs and claws yourself, how can you borrow them? And what did you plan to offer in exchange? King Daendolf chuckled while looking at his heir. It wasn't a derisive laughter nor a reprimanding gaze. He was earnestly advising the prince on his dreams. The commander of the court wizards? Will that young lion be content with merely that? He could wield the greatest power in any kingdom should he wish. Honian stayed quiet as he mulled over these words. Honian, Aroth can offer the lion nothing. With the wise Sienna at his side, even the promise of all of Aroth's magic won't turn the lion's head. However, if you build a relationship, perhaps you can borrow his fangs and claws without offering anything in return. If the lion is merciful, that is. Prince Honian lowered his head in realization. Only now did he understand why his father had sent him, the crown prince, every time there was an opportunity to show favor to Eugene. But that alone isn't enough, Honian. Do you think you can, as you are now, become an archwizard equal to the wise Sienna someday? I don't know. That's not the answer. There are endless possibilities in magic, and to reach any corner of those possibilities, you must have an unwavering belief that you will reach them. Your answer shouldn't be that you don't know. It should be that you will someday. Even if it is just that. Prince Honian's eyes welled up, and he shed silent tears as he nodded fervently in acknowledgement. If you truly desire to change this kingdom, you must become an archwizard worthy of such a task. Depend not on the lion's mercy but become a force so powerful that the lion would willingly lend you his fangs and claws, instructed King Daendolf, turning his gaze to the tapestry hung behind his throne. The royal banner of Aroth hung in full display, bearing beneath it the emblem of the royal family of Abram. An eagle gripping a staff in its talons, its wings spread wide in flight. The reason I chose you as the crown prince was my belief that you possessed wings of your own, the crown prince confessed, his voice resonating with conviction. Your Majesty, stammered Honian, overcome with emotion. Even so, today's events should stir the council's pot nicely. Daendolf reclined further into his throne, an amused chuckle rumbling in his chest. The management of the kingdom's budget lies in the hands of the council. I will greatly enjoy it if Lady Sienna takes it upon herself to splurge with the treasury. Even the aged members of the council wouldn't dare challenge the fury of the wise Sienna. Hence they wouldn't dare to contest the king's decision. Listening to his father's laughter, Honian bowed his head deeply. After reaching the sixth circle, he had not dedicated himself to the practice of magic as he had in the past. Preparations for succeeding the throne were there, but truth be told, he had thought, this much is enough. He did not feel a particular allure to becoming an archwizard, but he could no longer entertain such thoughts. He had witnessed the immense power one archwizard could wield. Magic, is it? Honian felt a burning desire ignite deep within his heart. Chapter 319, Abram 6. The palace grounds remained teeming with onlookers as if it was all but natural. The court wizards and knights had retreated inside, but citizens from the city, the wizards from the towers and members of the Wizards' Guild still lingered in droves on the other side of the lake. The wise Sienna. Sienna Meridian. Lady Sienna. Voices cried out, hailing Sienna's name in a raucous cacophony. The most fervent were the students who one day dreamt of being enlisted in the towers. No one knew from whence they acquired them, but they waved glowing cheer sticks and, disregarding the law, sent celebratory spells exploding into the sky. Boom boom boom. The lights painted the sky. Eugene checked Sienna's expression with a sideways glance. He had thought the girl would be embarrassed, but it was not so. Sienna had been used to such cheers for centuries. Having returned after a long absence, she considered such a welcome only natural. Eugene Lionheart. Successor of Lady Sienna. The second coming of the Great Vermouth. Hero of the Holy Sword. Among the chants for Sienna, Eugene's name also echoed. Eugene was familiar with such ovations too, but unlike Sienna, he could not enjoy it. His face twisting in discomfort, Eugene attempted to retreat, but Sienna would not allow it. With bold familiarity, Sienna snatched Eugene's hand and yanked him to her side. She then shot their hands into the sky for all to see. The crowd erupted in cheers, their enthusiasm confounding Eugene. He could not fathom the reason behind the fervor. Sienna then began to ascend slowly into the sky with Eugene. They could have shot up swiftly, but Sienna rose as if she was ascending to heaven, gradually, ever so slowly. The altitude kept increasing, but the cheers did not recede, instead growing louder with their slow ascent. Kiowa. Among the screaming, cheering crowd was Melkith, her dignity as a tower master cast aside like a discarded bone as she flung her arms into the air, dancing and cawing like a crow. Lady Sienna. Sienna, Sister Sienna. Take me too, please. Melkith pleaded while gasping for breath. The expressions of Herodotus, the Blue Tower Master, and Lovelian, the Red Tower Master, crumpled at her wild behavior. Please, White Tower Master. The juniors are watching. Melkith ignored the reprimand and flapped her arms to attempt to fly, leading the surrounding White Tower wizards to grab her legs in alarm. They tugged her down, barely managing to keep her grounded. Calm down, Tower Lord. You can't do this. Let me go, let me go. Send me to my older sis. Let me go. Despite their restraining efforts, Melkith continued her struggle. High above the sky, Eugene gazed down at the spectacle and felt dizzy. He had mentally prepared himself to some degree, but the sight of such craziness made him fear what lay ahead. Not just in Arath, but wherever he went, Sienna's presence would attract the gazes of the public, and he knew returning to the Lionheart mansion in just a few days would cause a great commotion as well. Did you see? Sienna tilted her head slightly towards Eugene and gave a snide smile. This is me. Do you like it? Asked Eugene. What's not to like? Responded Sienna. Seeing this makes me feel so wronged. If my name hadn't been left behind as someone stupid for the next generation, grumbled Eugene. It's even more ridiculous that you feel wronged. You should be thankful that they described you as stupid. Sienna chuckled, shrugging off the comment. Well, I don't know who wrote the fairy tale book, but you and Anise were already caught writing it together. Why do you keep denying it? Complained Eugene. Because it's not true. I didn't write it. Anise must have lost some memories after her death. She lied about us writing it together when she did it alone. I've already heard all about it. Anyway, it wasn't me. Why would I? Why would I write a fairy tale? Even if he already knew, she could not admit it. After all, the wishes she had casually added at the end. No. It wasn't a wish. It's a fact that the idiot liked me. Still, Sienna did not want to admit that she was the author of the fairy tale. She could at least make an excuse if she denied it, but there was no chance to justify the ensuing mockery once she admitted it. And you know what? Even if your name was passed down as Stupid Hamel, if you were to declare in front of everyone that you're actually the reincarnation of Hamel, wouldn't you hear cheers louder than what I've heard today? Retorted Sienna. It was fun to gather people and boast about their relationship as master and successor, but she also had the desire to reveal Eugene's true identity as Hamel and openly engage in a loving relationship. Maybe she could openly show their affection for each other. Are you out of your mind? Don't say such dreadful things. Why are you reacting so strongly? I can't do that. Eugene replied, breaking into a cold sweat on top of his grimacing expression. Although several people knew, Eugene did not want to increase the number of people who knew his true identity, especially not in the Lionheart family. He had made too many statements. How many times had he praised the greatness of Hamel in front of Gilead, Sin and Seal? He had said many times, even in front of Lovelian, that Hamel was a great hero who should be admired by all. What if everyone found out all that had been him stoking his own fire? Eugene was terrified to imagine what kinds of stares he would receive. It would be better to commit suicide. Eugene shivered and gritted his teeth. Unaware of his predicament, Sienna tilted her head, but she did not attempt to pry further as they rose higher into the air. Among the crowd, there were those who were chasing after Sienna and Eugene. They included reporters from Arath, foreign intelligence agents, as well as wizards who admired Sienna. However, neither the overt nor covert pursuit resulted in any success. The figures of Sienna and Eugene disappeared during the flight. We lost them. It was impossible for us to follow them in the first place. Black wizards in pristine clothing were gathered in an alleyway for a meeting. What should we do next? In the distant past, The wise Sienna did not tolerate the existence of black wizards in Aroth. There had only been 4 towers of magic in Aroth 3 centuries ago. After the war, the black wizards of Helmuth had longed to expand into the magic kingdom of Aroth. However, the wise Sienna had not permitted the black wizards to settle in Aroth. But after she suddenly went into seclusion, Helmuth had launched fierce lobbying to erect a black tower of magic in Aroth. The wise Sienna. She is an arch-wizard one cannot help but admire. It would be one thing if she only existed in legends from the distant past. Seeing the legend coming into reality should send shivers down the spine of any wizard. But it doesn't seem like the wise Sienna will tolerate black wizards in this era either. A black mage scoffed and shook his head. The Black Star faction leaves Aroth today. Finish up your affairs as quickly as possible and get moving. Yes. Let us reconvene at Helmuth. It wasn't just the Black Star faction that was holding such a meeting and deciding to leave Aroth. Several groups of black mages in the Mage Guild, not just the Black Tower of Magic, were also on the move. Their factions differed and hierarchies diverged depending on the demon they had contracted with, but the Black Wizards made the same decision regardless of their status. Even the demons of Bolero Street came to the same decision. Some chose to set a route for Helmuth, while others settled on alternate destinations. If the Black Tower Master was still here, we might have had some chance of observing the situation for a while. The contracted demon of the Black Star faction was a close collaborator of Amelia Merwin. As such, they had taken on the role of monitoring the Black Tower Master of the time, Balzac Ludbeth, while exerting efforts for the study and development of black magic in Aroth. It wasn't just the Black Star faction that harbored such secret intentions. Several factions of black wizards belonging to the Black Tower of Magic or the Wizard Guild had the intention to monitor, check, and possibly capture Balzac. However, even after several decades of contact, capturing Balzac Ludbeth had proved impossible. They had failed to see any results from their task of monitoring and keeping him in check. Balzac was faultless and meticulous. He's just like a textbook example of a black wizard. He was an inscrutable wizard, and knowing what he was thinking was impossible. He hadn't actually done anything with a purpose until now, nor was he at the center of any conspiracy. Even so, his mere existence was suspicious. For decades, this mysterious man had been treated as such, without affiliating with any faction. He had no interest in politics and lived quietly in the Black Tower of Magic for decades, despite being one of the 3 mages of incarceration. That was why the demons of Helmuth and Amelia Merwin were keen to monitor and check on Balzac's movements and attempted to capture him. He was suspiciously too suspicious. But even that had lost its meaning. After Balzac suddenly left the Black Tower of Magic for a vacation, they tried to track him down, but even that failed. Even after a few months, Balzac had not returned to the Black Tower. Having lost their target to monitor and now faced with a threat to their own safety, many of the Black Wizards could no longer stay in Aroth. While the Black Wizards and demons were holding their meeting, the intelligence agents were also busy after losing track of Sienna. The wise Sienna had returned after breaking hundreds of years of seclusion. What did this represent? What they needed to consider first and foremost was the Night March, which had taken place just a few months ago at the northernmost point of the continent, Lehane. The Blade of Incarceration, Gavid Lindman, and the Black Mist attended. In addition, the progenitor of Roer, the Brave Molan, had returned. Moreover, the Demon King of Incarceration had descended in person after not showing himself for centuries. That Demon King mentioned the Holy Sword and the hero. He spoke of the promise's end and the war, the current master of the Holy Sword, the descendant of Vermouth. Would they ascend Babel? That night, the words of the Demon King of Incarceration shook the entirety of the continent. Peace was ending. It was possible that a brutal war similar to the one 300 years ago was on the horizon. The Demon King of Incarceration wasn't afraid of the continent turning its sword on him. Instead, he was joyfully waiting for that day. If a war truly broke out, it would not be the kings of the continent who declared it, nor would it be the Demon King who waited for the end of the promise. The one who would shatter the peace and directly end the oath would be the young hero who had gained recognition and attention from the Demon King of Incarceration himself. The arch-wizard Sienna, who had lived since the era of war, had returned. Moreover, Eugene Lionheart had declared that he would ascend Babel. The Brave Molan was confirmed to be alive, and in just a few months, the arch-wizard who secluded herself for centuries had returned to Aroth. The spies relaying the news to their respective nations couldn't help but look gloomy. Even though they tried not to entertain negative thoughts, they could hardly avoid them, considering what had transpired. War is coming. The spies could not help but tremble when they envisioned the fearful future. After returning to the hotel, Eugene and Sienna quietly took their seats in front of Anise and listened to her scolding. "Are you out of your mind? We should be laying low right now, but instead, you decide to start a fight with the royal family of Aroth?" shouted Anise. "I didn't start a fight. I simply exercised my legitimate right," retorted Sienna. "Legitimate right? Is that what you call sinking an entire castle underwater?" countered Anise. "That's an exaggeration. I didn't sink it. I simply dipped it slightly into water. Are you trying to make excuses now?" "It's not an excuse. Anise, you saw it too. This nation made my mansion a tourist attraction and sold my likeness as a statue. They even sold portraits with my initials, fountain pens, cloaks, robes, and staves in souvenir shops. You should be grateful for the love of future generations." Eugene, who was also being scolded along with her, chimed in with a small voice. Sienna's eyes widened and she slapped Eugene's shoulder, saying, "Don't side with Anise in front of me." "Should I side with you then?" "Well, that would be nice. If I side with you, Anise will blow off my jaw." "My goodness, Hamel. I feel like I'm going to cry with joy. When did you become so cunning?" said Sienna while glaring at Anise with her eyes wide. Anise glared back at Sienna, her eyes sharp. "Strictly speaking, I'm not on either of your sides. Sienna, if you do something to be scolded for, I will scold you with Anise. And if Anise or Christina did something worthy of scorn, I will scorn them with you," said Eugene. "You little brat. Unprincipled bastard. Well, if you both want to scold me, I will humbly accept it," said Eugene, nodding. Boiling with anger, Sienna tried to grab Eugene's hair. However, unlike the last time, he quickly pulled his head back and escaped her grasp. "Don't do it," warned Eugene. "Why? The hair you pulled out last time hasn't even grown back. My hair is thick so it doesn't show, but if you look here, there's a small empty patch. Do you want me to go bald?" "No." Sienna had to imagine Eugene's bald head for a moment before shaking her head. "Sienna, your actions are totally disrespectful and violent. Hamel's impulsive behavior was enough to trouble and exhaust me. What am I supposed to do if you start acting the same way?" asked Anise. "It ended well, so what's the problem?" answered Sienna. "I am saying that such incidents should not happen in the future. I have been declared dead to the world, so I am fine and Molen is not operating with us. But Sienna, you will continue to be with us, won't you? I'm pissed that you're treating me the same as Hamel. Do you think I acted thoughtlessly like Hamel? What I did it to evaluate the impact of my existence." "Hamel could make the same excuse," countered Anise. "I've done similar things many times before." Eugene nodded with a smug smile. Being scolded together like this brought back memories, and in fact it was quite enjoyable. It had always ended up like this when they stole Anise's liquor. Sienna, however, pouted without a hint of laughter. She was unhappy that Eugene was subtly, or rather blatantly, siding with Anise when he was supposed to be on the same boat as her. Suddenly something crossed Sienna's mind. "Anise, do you really have any right to scold me so confidently?" said Sienna. "Why are you changing the topic so suddenly?" responded Anise. "I heard it from Eugene and Mare. Last time you barged into the papacy, killed a cardinal, and even slapped the pope, didn't you?" accused Sienna. "To be precise, I wasn't the one who killed the cardinal, and it wasn't me who slapped the pope. It was Christina," Anise answered smugly. "Sister." Christina shouted with surprise at Anise's words, but Anise casually ignored it. "Moreover, all those things are not known to the world. We did crazy things in secret. But you, Sienna, did it openly for the whole world to see." "Oh, I don't care," Sienna interrupted her, then plopped on the spot without listening to the rest of Anise's words. Anise's eyebrows twitched with annoyance as she gave a long sigh. "You lived for 300 years, but why are you so childish?" Anise grumbled. "Can you be precise?" "I was sealed for 200 years, responded Sienna. "You were alive, not dead, so you are indeed 300 years old." Anise clicked her tongue and shook her head. "Speaking of which, Sienna, you need to be careful in the future." "What do I need to be careful of now?" asked Sienna. "You've declared Hamel as your successor in public, haven't you?" Anise pointed at Eugene. Now think about it, Sienna. The world knows you as the wise Sienna, the grand elderly wizard who has lived for 300 years. Take out the elderly part, shouted Sienna. Fine. Let's compromise with experienced wizard. Anyway, you need to be wary of the public eye, continued Anise. What do you mean? If you treat Hamel purely as your successor, there won't be any problem. But you won't, right, Sienna? Even if you call him your successor, you will hold his hand, lock arms with him, or do other things which might seem subtle to you but would be perceived as extremely obvious flirtations by everyone else, said Anise. Flirtation? Yes, flirtation. Anise nodded with emphasis as a victorious smile spread across her face. A 300-year-old wizard flirting with a young man who is just in his 20s. What would the world think when they saw this? It felt as if a bolt of lightning struck Sienna's brain. With a dazed expression, her eyes widened in understanding. Sienna, for your own sake and for Hamel's sake, you must be very, very careful in your actions. That is, unless you want to be mocked and laughed at by the world. Then what about you? Said Sienna with a trembling voice. Me? I see no issue here. After all, the vessel I inhabit, Christina, is only 23 years old, said Anise. But you're a saint, right? What of it? The saint and the hero. Such a romantic and sweet resonance, wouldn't you say? Isn't that right, Christina? Asked Anise. Yes, sister, Christina chimed in while cupping her hands together, a swift smile replacing the previous expression. Sienna's shoulders shook in response to their banter. Eugene, declare your identity to the world now. Reveal that you are not the 21-year-old Eugene Lionheart, but Hamel from 300 years ago, shouted Sienna. Do you think I'm crazy? Eugene dashed away from Sienna, clearly taken aback. Despair contorted Sienna's face as she clutched her head. But what the world might think isn't relevant, is it? At this point, Mare decided to interject to bolster Sienna's spirits. Clearing her throat, she spoke from her place on the bed. If someone were to laugh at you, Lady Sienna, for being lovesick, I would be the first to land a punch on that person's face. Right, Mare, you're correct. Who would dare to mock me unless they wish to forfeit their life? Said Sienna. Sienna shot up from her place while spreading her arms towards Mare. The latter leaped from the bed into Sienna's embrace as if she had been waiting for the moment. If you and Sir Eugene hold my hands and we walk together, we will appear just like a perfect family, said Mare. Yes, that would be the case. I made you resemble me for such. Sienna halted mid-sentence and froze. The long-held desire she had harbored when she created Mare in her solitude had now become a desire too shaming and sinister to voice. Ah. However, it was already too late. Mare gazed up at Sienna, her eyes shining. Does this mean that when you created me, you didn't simply make me as a familiar, but with the thought of me as your daughter? Could it be you've been indulging in some family play fantasy at your age? Imagining a daughter between you and the deceased Hamel, creating her as a familiar. Anise joined in with a forced chuckle, prompting the question. Eugene looked silently shocked as he turned his gaze between Mare and Sienna. Don't misunderstand, said Sienna. Yes, of course it must be a misunderstanding. After all, while Mare resembles you, there's no part of her that resembles Hamel, said Anise. There was nothing that could be done about that. While I have not seen Sir Eugene's previous face directly, Sir Hamel I saw in Akron was not particularly handsome. Lady Sienna wouldn't want to imprint the face of the not-so-handsome Hamel on me, her perfect creation over that of Eugene, who is. That's not it, Eugene cut Mare off, his face serious. My past self wasn't ugly at all. I was quite charming and good-looking. No wonder. I can see why you don't want to reveal your true identity. Sienna glanced at Eugene, a grimace twisting her face. However, she did not refute his claim of being charmingly handsome. Chapter 320. The Red Tower of Magic 1. Sienna, who had left early in the morning to visit the royal treasury, returned to their hotel sometime after noon. Do you guys know what this is? Sienna asked with a smirk as she strutted over to them, her chest puffed up in pride. She reached into an inside pocket of her cloak and drew out a card that shone with a platinum sheen. Waving it in front of them, she answered her own question. This is something called a card. Yes. Eugene and Christina just nodded in response with bewildered expressions on their faces. Sienna was slightly taken aback by their reactions, but she soon smoothed out her expression. Having returned to civilization after hundreds of years of isolation, Sienna was unfamiliar with the modern conveniences used in this era, for example things like this card. Ahem. I had noticed that kids these days weren't carrying around pouches filled with coins. I had thought that they might just be using pockets lined with spatial magic instead, but it seems that they're using small cards like this in place of money, Sienna said, only to stop and shoot a glance at Eugene and Christina through narrowed eyes. You two aren't by any chance feeling like there's something like a generational gap between you and me, are you? Eugene hesitated before changing the subject. When I first saw those cards I was also quite surprised. It made me think that the world really has gotten a lot better. Right. Sienna nodded excitedly. You felt the same thing, didn't you? Really now, the world has seen a lot of improvement. From what I've heard, it isn't just their money pouches. Did you know that kids these days don't even need to bring a cart to carry their equipment when traveling? They say that every cat and dog, one, goes around carrying spatial magic artifacts. Eugene tried to rein her in. Well, it's not like spatial magic is really that widespread. I know, but setting that aside, Sienna waved him off with a proud look. If you really look at it, isn't all this progress a result of my achievements as the wise Lady Sienna? Just think about it. Do you know what you had to do to learn magic in the old days? You needed to apprentice yourself to an elderly wizard who might pass away at any moment, follow them around while brow-nosing them, doing all sorts of chores in return for a worthless mental training method. But you learned your magic from the elves, Eugene pointed out. Sienna snapped. Of course, I'm not talking about myself right now. I'm talking about the wizards of the past. Do you know just how much of a mess the magical education in this country was when I first arrived in Arath? In that era, while it was still being taught, magic wasn't really a proper field of study. In fact, the largest problem was that most of the exceptional wizards born in that era had died during the decades of war. The one who ripped that mess apart and stitched it back together was me, Lady Sienna, Sienna declared proudly. Fine, you did great. As expected of Lady Sienna. Eugene and Christina both played along. Lady Sienna is amazing. Indeed, Lady Sienna does deserve her reputation. Clap, clap, clap. Mare and Rhaenyra even went so far as to follow their compliments with applause. But even in the face of this overly enthusiastic response, Sienna was confident and unashamed. Plopping down on the sofa, she spun the card around between her fingers and said, They told me that there is only one card like this in the entire world, and it was created especially for me. They said something about it having a direct and unlimited connection to Aratha's treasury? Doesn't have, what was that word, a credit limit? That means I can buy anything with it. Wow, Eugene reacted insincerely. Ignoring the sarcasm, Sienna mused, Shall we buy a castle in preparation for our old age? Christina gave her opinion. I think that Sir Eugene and I are still too young to already be preparing our retirement plans. Why does she keep having to chime in? How annoying, Sienna thought with narrowed eyes as she glared at Christina. Sienna didn't dare to say anything out loud. If she kept talking under such circumstances, and the conversation carried along in this vein, Sienna was sure she would just end up receiving a one-sided beating of words. Didn't you bring anything else back from the treasury? Mare asked, her eyes widening with excitement. In response, Sienna just grabbed the hem of her cloak with one hand. This was the same cloak she had received as her first gift from Eugene. Although it hadn't been enchanted with many spells when she first received it, Sienna had stayed up the entire previous night to inscribe various spells into the cloak. Take a look at this, Sienna said with a smile as she pulled out a long staff from inside her cloak. It was a luxurious staff that definitely didn't look like any ordinary item. The white staff was made out of an unknown material that emitted a faint light. The legendary staff that has been passed down through Aratha's royal lineage, Frost. Sienna proudly presented as she gently waved the staff she was now holding with both hands. Then, just as the staff's name suggested it could, Frost began to let out a spray of white snow-like particles. This wasn't just a simple visual effect. Each of the particles that Frost was emitting was a physical mana crystal. Sienna explained, they had several other staffs, but this one was the most versatile and suited me the best. Well, after I make some adjustments here and there, it will be. It was an amazing item that was incomparably better than the staff that Sienna had made back in the Elven territory. However, it was still nothing compared to Akasha. I was hoping that they might at least have a dragon heart hidden somewhere in there, Sienna thought in disappointment. Since it was called the Kingdom of Magic, Sienna had thought they might have a few artifacts made from dragon materials hidden deep within the treasury. However, no matter how much she had rummaged through the place, she still hadn't been able to find a staff that was better than Frost. Sienna hummed thoughtfully as she stared at Rhaenyra through narrowed eyes. Although Sienna didn't say anything directly, the intent behind her gaze was so blatant that Rhaenyra started trembling in fear. Instinctively covering up the ruby on her forehead, Rhaenyra staggered backward. Rhaenyra stammered, "Lady Sienna, why are you looking at this lady like that? Isn't there any way we can pull that thing off your forehead?" Sienna asked thoughtfully. Rhaenyra whimpered, "That will surely kill this lady." The ruby had been personally inlaid by Rhysakia himself. Although Rhysakia was already dead, the ruby hadn't disappeared. After growing up with Rhaenyra for hundreds of years, the ruby had completely transformed into a part of her. Although it seemed that it could possibly be extracted somehow, the risk of Rhaenyra dying from doing so seemed quite large. "Well, if it's not possible, then forget it," Sienna said dismissively as she let go of her current lingering feelings of greed and returned to rummaging inside her cloak. Although she would be able to re-enter the treasury whenever she wanted to from now on, since she happened to be there, Sienna had taken with her everything that had caught her interest. One by one, Sienna placed down several magic books on the desk that anyone could tell were ancient from just a single glance. "These are all books of ancient magic," Sienna explained. "I've looked through them a few times before but gave up because I couldn't understand them, even with Akasha." The reason why she was digging into these books of ancient magic once more was Vermouth, they all thought. Definitely that bastard. There was the dark room, the barrier at Lahinjar, and even Hamel's reincarnation to top it all off. In addition to all of that, even back then 300 years ago, Vermouth had often used strange spells of unknown origins. Sienna had asked Vermouth about the true nature of those spells several times, but she had never once been able to wring out a proper response from him. Although they couldn't be sure whether or not the magic that Vermouth had used was ancient magic for now, that was their only plausible guess. The Demon Kings, Eugene considered a different train of thought. Upon seeing the Moonlight Sword, Rhysakia had called it the Sword of Destruction. He had said that the reason Vermouth and his descendants in the Lionheart clan could wield the weapons of the Demon Kings was that Vermouth's blood was special. But the reason why it was special, they had no idea. What was Vermouth's true identity? They had wondered about that question even back then 300 years ago. Even when everyone else was talking about their own personal matters, Vermouth, who rarely had anything to say regarding most topics, would be even more reserved than usual. Though the same went for Anise, Eugene recalled. Eugene now knew why Anise wouldn't say anything under such circumstances. Vermouth should also have had his reasons for doing so. While feeling distressed, Eugene tried to jolt his thoughts back into motion. 300 years ago, Vermouth had been captured by a group of black wizards and demon folk. In that era, there were many cases of people being captured by demon folk and black wizards. Among these victims, it was common for them to become test subjects for black magic experiments or to be used as living sacrifices by both the black wizards and the demon folk. While being transported somewhere, Vermouth wrested a knife from one of his guards and slaughtered the demon folk and black wizards. This had happened when he was only in his mid-teens. Although anyone who heard this story might say that it sounded absurd, everyone who had ever met with Vermouth personally was able to accept it. Even though it sounded ridiculous, if it was Vermouth Lionheart you were talking about, it was definitely plausible. Was he really a test subject for a black magic experiment? It wasn't something that Eugene had ever given any thought to before, but considering the various suspicions that revolved around Vermouth, Eugene suspected that this guess might just be the truth. If Vermouth was originally the result of a black magic experiment, then while he was being transported, he could have awakened the power granted to him and thus been able to make his escape by killing all of the demon folk and black wizards. Anise and Christina were incarnations of the ancient god of light. To be more precise, they were mock incarnations created by using the ashes of the Holy Emperor. And it wasn't just the two of them. All of the saints and the saint candidates in Yura's past had been such existences. Vermouth might also be something similar. By using the blood, flesh, or something along those lines of a demon folk. Or perhaps even a demon king, he could have been an artificial creation. Thanks to that, he could have been able to use the Demon King's weapons and even control the Moonlight Sword. Damn it, Eugene cursed silently. That meant that the Lionheart blood within this body of his might just be mixed with the blood of demons. But Eugene himself had never felt anything like that, and Anise had also never noticed any warning signs regarding this possibility. In the first place, it wasn't just the Demon King's weapons. Vermouth had also been able to use the Holy Sword of the God of Light, and currently, Eugene could also freely wield the Holy Sword. In the end, these speculations about the suspicions revolving around Vermouth were all just sudden leaps of logic. However, if Eugene really did consider the situation from this direction, a lot of things would suddenly make sense. For example, why had the remnants of the Demon King been so attracted to that foolish and weak Uid? Why had they been so obsessed with using those who shared Uid Lionheart's bloodline as living sacrifices, basically Vermouth's bloodline, which had been most strongly inherited through the lineage of the main family? Why hadn't Vermouth's bloodline thinned even slightly after being passed down over hundreds of years? Last night, Eugene talked with Sienna and Anise about the suspicions regarding Vermouth. It's not really that surprising. Instead, without such a secret behind it, an existence like Sir Vermouth wouldn't make any sense. Although they did show an appropriate level of surprise, eventually Sienna and Anise overcame their shock just to say this. Eugene had also empathized with the feelings behind their words. From then on, there were no further discussions of this theory. Eugene had also been able to sense why that was. Sienna trusted Vermouth. Even though he didn't seem to be in his right mind, they couldn't be sure whether that was truly the case. Even though Vermouth, in such a state, had pierced a hole through her chest and left her on the verge of death. Even though her very soul was now wounded. Even with all of that, Sienna still trusted Vermouth. For Anise, Vermouth was the one who had flipped the course of her life. The hero who had given meaning to her role as the saint when she herself had been despising her fate as the saint. As such, Anise practically worshipped Vermouth, and even now she still referred to Vermouth as Sir Vermouth. But was that really all there was to it? Oh, it wasn't. The reason why Sienna believed in Vermouth despite having been mortally wounded by him. The reason why Anise believed in Vermouth beyond the sense of worship that she had for him. And the reason why Eugene, whether consciously or unconsciously, had stopped his speculations about Vermouth. It was that, to them, Vermouth was just Vermouth. No matter what Vermouth's true identity might be, it didn't change what that bastard Vermouth Lionheart meant to them. A black magic experiment? Or a test subject that had a connection to the Demon Kings? So what if he was? Sienna, Anise, Hamel, Molen, and Vermouth had journeyed together throughout the Devildom for over a dozen years. They had spent more time together than they ever had with their own families. There had been times when they were close to death and times when they barely managed to kill their enemies, along with all of the other times that they had spent together. They had experienced joy and sorrow and all sorts of other emotions together. That was why they all trusted Vermouth. So whether it was Vermouth's past, his inscrutable behavior, or his current unknown status, if it was for Vermouth's sake, they could accept all of that. Because of him, they didn't doubt the things that should really be considered suspicious. They blindly, one-sidedly, were able to come up with justifications for Vermouth. Eugene didn't think that there was anything irrational about this. The same went for Sienna as well as Anise. Even Molen, who had been going mad while unable to take his own life for over 150 years because of a promise he had made with Vermouth, would have also done the same. Because this wasn't just anyone else, this was Vermouth. Because this was the companion who they had worked alongside to slay the Demon Kings. Because this was the hero who had somehow managed to save the world. So when their thoughts turned to Vermouth, they naturally had no choice but to put their emotions ahead of their own reason. In Aratha's Red Tower of Magic, the Tower Master Lovelian had been deep in thought since the day before. He was wondering what could have happened at the royal palace. Just what kind of conversation might have taken place during their audience with the king. Everyone in Arath might have been curious about this topic, but it wasn't something that they could talk about openly. In the end, word of what had happened yesterday within Abram hadn't been spread to anyone. Tremple Vizardo, who had also been present during their audience with the king, had of course, kept his mouth shut. And the Crown Prince Honian Abram had also kept his silence. And starting from last night, Honian had secluded himself within Akron. This meant that things should have been wrapped up neatly. Because if things hadn't been wrapped up neatly, Abram might no longer exist. But what was truly preoccupying Lovelian's attention wasn't what might have happened within Abram. It had something to do with the surprising return of the wise Sienna. Well, it wasn't really that big of a surprise for Lovelian. He had accompanied Eugene to the Samar rainforest and had helped to stop Edmund's plot. He had also seen the corpse of the demon dragon Raizakia, the one responsible for trapping Sienna in a slumber for such a long time. The fact that Sienna would eventually return to Aroth had already been known to Lovelian. He just hadn't known that she would return so quickly. Perhaps, could she really? Lovelian was lost in thought as he idly massaged his temples. Currently, many irrational and mostly speculative thoughts were running through his head. But Lovelian's suspicions weren't directed at the wise Sienna. They instead concerned Eugene Lionheart. During the battle in Samar, Lovelian had gotten a good look at Eugene's full strength. Eugene had been able to overwhelm the Death Knight created from the corpse of the stupid Hamel. Even after seeing such skill with his own eyes, Lovelian still had difficulty believing it. But then Eugene had gone and torn apart Edmund Codrith, the staff of incarceration, with his own hands. And it didn't just end there, did it? Eugene had even managed to behead and slay the highly notorious black dragon Raizakia. Although Lovelian hadn't been able to view the battle in person, and Eugene had said that he did receive Sienna's help, there was no doubt that Eugene Lionheart was skilled enough that he could be discussed on the same level as the strongest human beings in all of history. Moreover, his talent for magic was also exceptional, and he had even created a signature which could be said to serve as a symbol for all archwizards. It's practically impossible for someone like that to exist, Lovelian concluded. There had been several times in Samar when Lovelian had had such thoughts. At first he had dismissed his own suspicions as absurd, but the more that he thought about it, the more he began to believe that it might just be possible. Perhaps Eugene Lionheart really was the reincarnation of a hero from 300 years ago. Otherwise, it was impossible to accept that someone like him could exist in real life. The thing that had especially aroused Lovelian's suspicions was how Eugene, upon seeing Hamel's Death Knight, had declared, "That's not Hamel." Eugene might have given several reasons for why that was the case. But even so, Eugene's rage and the denial of the Death Knight's identity that he had spat out at that time hadn't sounded like something that could so easily be said by someone from a later generation. It was as if he had personally known Hamel 300 years ago. Then there was the previous day. The wise Lady Sienna had shown a lot of affection towards Eugene. Was it just because Eugene was her hundreds of years younger successor? That might be enough for Sienna to consider him a cute junior. However, her gaze had felt like it was practically dripping with sweet drops of honey. It hadn't seemed like the casual tolerance of a grandmaster for her grand disciple or how one might treat a young and cute successor. Instead it was as if Lady Sienna had been looking at him like a man she was interested in. Lovelian muttered, Could it really be no, perhaps? Lovelian was afraid of the incredible ramifications if the suspicions running through his head turned out to be the truth. At the same time, as a devoted researcher, he felt a strong sense of curiosity. His talent for both martial arts and magic. Historically, there was only one person who has ever been born with such limit-breaking talent. That was the ancestor of the Lionheart clan, the Great Vermouth. However, Sir Eugene's personality just doesn't strike me as that of the Great Vermouth. Considering Eugene's intense dislike, murderous intent and rage towards Hamel's Death Knight. His low-class mannerisms that seemed unthinkable when coming from an offspring of the prestigious Lionheart clan. His fighting technique that seemed both fierce yet delicate. I've always liked you. A stroke of lightning seemed to explode inside Lovelian's head. Unconsciously, he leaped up from his seat. Then, while focusing on the sudden stroke of inspiration that had run through his head, Lovelian reconstructed his flow of thought. From the way that the Great Vermouth had explosively grown the Lionheart clan by taking more than 10 wives, to the last words that the stupid Hamel had left at the end of his life. And how the wise Sienna had stayed single for her entire life. Oh my God! Lovelian cried out, only to slap his hands over his mouth as an idea sharply clicked into place. Knock knock. Someone reported through the door of his office. Sir Tower Master. Lady Sienna and Sir Eugene are heading into our Tower of Magic right at this moment. What? Lovelian exclaimed in shock. He had heard them say they would visit the Red Tower of Magic when they next had the time, but today? Even though only a single day had passed since they said it? Lovelian ordered, escort them up here immediately. No, that's not right. I'll go down and... The voice interrupted him. They're already on their way up. Even though he was greatly flustered, Lovelian quickly made his preparations for their visit. He threw open his closet, took out the most luxurious and elegant robe in his possession and pulled it on. Then he hurriedly tidied up his hair and also neatly sorted the mess on his desk with a wave of his staff. This might actually be for the best, Lovelian tried to reassure himself as he swallowed a gulp. With this surprising truth that he seemed to have arrived at, there was no way that he could just keep it buried in his chest. A wizard was someone who sought the truth. So Lovelian was determined to face this issue head-on. Before he had even heard another knock, Lovelian threw open the door to his tower master's office. There he saw Hera repeatedly shifting from one foot to the other, not knowing what to do. "Head back down," Lovelian instructed. "Why, sir?" Hera stammered. Lovelian continued, "Also, spread the word to all of the wizards currently in the tower. Tell them to keep their heads cool and stay where they're supposed to be." "Yes, sir," Hera shouted with a deep nod as she started to run back down the hallway. But on her way down she came to an abrupt stop. It was because the elevator that was located at the end of the hallway was just about to arrive here on the top floor. If Hera continued to run forward like this, it was clear that she would run into Sienna and Eugene when the elevator doors opened. That was meant to be a happy event that would fill any wizard with honor and pride. However, Hera realized that she herself still wasn't ready for this just yet. If she ran into Lady Sienna like this, Hera felt like she would either pass out on the spot or scream joyfully. Hera didn't want either Sienna or Eugene to see her like that. In the end, Hera quickly made her decision. She flung open the hallway window, then threw herself out of the window without hesitation. Even in that instant, Hera was thorough in her cleanup. The moment her whole body passed through the window, she quietly closed the window behind herself with a swing of her staff. Ding dong. Right at the very moment when Lovelian's jaw was dropping open in shock at Hera's decisive behavior, the elevator arrived on the top floor. Lovelian picked his jaw back up and quickly straightened his posture. No, this still wasn't polite enough. Faster than he had ever been before, Lovelian cast a spell that instantly transported him across the length of the hallway so that he was now standing in front of the elevator. The elevator doors opened up. Eugene and Sienna flinched when they saw Lovelian standing politely on the other side of the doors. "Thank you for taking the time to visit," Lovelian said with a deep bow of his head. While continuing to speak, he didn't forget to take a few steps back so that Eugene and Sienna could exit the elevator comfortably. "Oh, greatest and wisest archwizard in the history of the continent, she who is the most respected and envied of all wizards, Lady Sienna Meridian." After he had finished saying all this, Lovelian took a moment to catch his breath and then added, "Also, it is my honor to greet Lady Sienna's old friend, Sir Hamel Dynas,